and your questions for the speakers. So please interact with us using the Q&A and chat functions. Coming up, we've got a selection of really good speakers coming up for you. We've got two panel discussions, one which will discuss the rise in threats to the banking and financial services sector. We'll then hear from a FireEye expert on what we can expect in a changing cybercriminal ecosystem. And then we will hear a panel discussion on cybercriminal or cybercrime horror stories. Indeed, I'm sure there's a fair few coming up there, very few interesting and indeed galling accounts, no doubt. Now, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our moderator for our upcoming panel discussion. He is the Regional Director of Continental Europe, the Middle East and Africa at the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Welcome, John Solomon.
Thanks very much. Good morning to everybody from Spain. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to introduce our panelists. So first of all, Jelena Maton is the CISO for the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg. Jelena is an award-winning CISO. Hello. And has 15 years of professional experience in information security, governance, audit, risk mitigation, and implementation of best practices for large multinational private and public sector organizations with global presence. She currently holds a senior head of an operational risk and security risk, cybersecurity risk position for the European Investment Bank. Next up, I'd like to welcome Majed Al-Shadari. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's the CISO of Allied Cooperative Insurance Group in Saudi Arabia. Majed is a certified CISO and certified digital business transformation officer. He is a licensed MCI IT consultant with over 19 years of international professional experience at both the senior management and technical hands-on level. He's the first Saudi awarded as best CISO in the world finalist and the first Saudi certified in digital business transformation and winner of the Arab CISO Award. So welcome to you. And last but not least, joining us is Dr. Erdal Ozkaya. He's the regional CISO for Standard Chartered Bank in the UAE. He's a leading cybersecurity professional with business development, management, and academic skills, focused on securing the cyberspace and sharing his real-life skills as a securizer, speaker, lecturer, and author. Erdal is a global superhero CISO award winner. So we have a very illustrious panel today. Well, the format will be, I'll be asking a couple of questions of the entire group as well as individuals. And this will be mixed in with a number of polls that will pop up on your screen if you're dialed in via Zoom. So please, when the polls pop up, do make sure that you're answering these. And if we have time at the end, we'll take a moment for question and answer for either the entire panel or for individual participants. So as a CISO, question one, I'd like to ask if you've seen any changes to your job responsibilities, your focal areas, what is keeping you awake during COVID-19? Has anything changed significantly? So maybe ladies first, start with Jelena.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here with all of you. So what's keeping me at night besides my 3-year-old son? I think we would say, yes, the description has changed. Perhaps it's just intensified the way we work. And I think one of the most obvious ones is the reason why the CISOs are very busy these days is definitely the importance that we realize even more so than ever before of securing remote users. This mandate that we all had to get employees up and running first and then addressing security afterwards was probably the situation we all found ourselves in. And it has forced, the COVID-19 has definitely forced security teams to work uphill, to say, and to catch up, meaning the ad hoc risk assessments that we find ourselves doing nowadays, a lot more compliance and controls adjustments, importance of working together with IT security, DPOs, importance of sharing the information with your peers in other organizations of a huge value and it's extremely important to us. Then we also think about endpoint security controls. And here, when I say this, I primarily think about the providing network access and blocking the malware. And definitely the one where we see a huge increase in our job description and what we do on a daily basis is probably the critical need to train our end users, as Brian Seeley already has mentioned. So this is what I would say.
So thank you very much. Moving over to Majed. Can you give us your take on that?
In addition to what Jelena just mentioned, and she covered, by the way, all aspects, starting from the end user up to the governance and regulations. The idea behind was the CISO or the information security team should be available at offices or all the time, round the clock. But with the COVID-19 and enabling the remote work for especially for larger scale organizations, that's was very critical to the information security and to the business operations. So the second point, having permanent CISOs or information security on sites, the idea start being changed and to go with the virtual team, especially with the leadership and also with the technical for the information security. In addition, to go and comply and align with the outsourcing and remote work regulation that being enforced by the local and international regulators.
Thank you very much. And may I just add that I wish I could make a Gutra look as good as you guys in Saudi. I can't pull it off. So my compliments. Moving over to Erdal, if you'd like to give us your take on that.
All right, I think everybody's aware, all about the changes, right? Not just us, the CISOs. Most of our workforce used to go to the offices, me working in the banking sector, to the branches. Overnight, everything had to change. We were not allowed to go outside. As a result, remote working, ensuring remote security. As a I'm pretty sure you all are aware of, I don't want to repeat what the previous speakers have said, but the phishing awareness and ensuring that we are up to date. So I do my best. If necessary, I don't sleep until my computer's patch where possible. Or I do my best to ensure that training hits every single person in the organization, including the third parties, not just the full-time employees. This was keeping me awake, and honestly, it is still. Yes, we're going to the new normal. Yes, in UAE at least, we started to go back to office in a shorter, with a limited persons. But if you look to my region, Middle East, Africa, and Pakistan, there are still some countries where they cannot go fully to the office. So COVID is still keeping me busy to ensure that our day-to-day operation can continue regardless from where you are. And I think this fits perfectly well to 2020.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Beside the COVID sickness, when I said 2020, usually it was always giving me this beautiful shiny light, but unfortunately 2020 so far for none of us looks that shiny, right? Sorry, I had to make this distinction as well.
One day all will be well. Thank you, Erdal. So moving on to poll number 1, if the team could please pop that up. Question is, have you implemented new tools or techniques for know your customer and anti-money laundering compliance due to the pandemics? So basically asking whether you've decided to do this based on internal assessments, based on external criteria, directives, or you really don't see a need to change this. Please note that this is anonymous. The poll will be up for 1 minute. Please take a moment to vote. And obviously, while we're doing this, don't hesitate to put your questions in chat as well, and we'll see if we can get around to as many of these as possible. All right. We've got almost 300 participants on, so we're going to expect almost that many answers. So please, let's get a good statistical sampling here. Obviously, during the pandemic, requirements don't change for dealing with fraud, dealing with money laundering considerations for any registered financial institution. We have seen a lot of organizations losing focus, and really only being entirely focused on COVID-related issues. We're trying to get a good idea of whether this is increased and changed, so make sure you vote. All right, the results are coming in now. So we've got a pretty even balance across the board. Seems that, you know, we don't really have a good idea of what types of organizations are being represented here. Please note that, you know, we're not all financial firms here, and we are, you know, representing a lot of vendors, a lot of academic institutions as well. Keep that in mind. All right, so moving on. Next question is for Jelena. Question for you is, what steps are you taking to design security risk mitigation in your organization? So 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you, John. So I'd say some of the things that are extremely important are probably monitoring the industry news, and as well as looking for the security threats to understand the risks you're facing. Also important is exchanging information with peers in other organizations so that you know what they're facing. Perhaps we exchange between IFIs because we might have the same threat actors along the lines. Also developing our countermeasures by reviewing our risk factors involved. This would be a next step for us, and this is where plenty of our on-the-fly risk assessments come in these days. And I cannot say that how much it has increased during the COVID time now. And then once we see the potential threat that has been identified, then we also determine what risk potentials and countermeasures are appropriate for our organization as well. And last but not least, and the one that we definitely watch out for that goes beyond risk management and mitigation and into the importance of user education is doing the phishing simulations to our end users, training them afterwards, giving them the results, actually educate them on where they have made mistakes and how to watch out and spot such things in the emails coming forward to them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Moving on to Majed. Obviously, the board is a major factor in a lot of our decision making in the information security space. So how have your organization's board changed their views on risk in the last 6 months in a way, and how has that impacted the overall discussion about cybersecurity and cyber risk?
Actually, it's not only about our board as much as most of the organization boards committees. They start considering the information security, unfortunately, for certain level, that it's a key player in the companies and they need to contribute and invest in heavily, especially with the COVID-19 period. As mentioned before, there are being established and published new regulations coming from this scratch that need to be implemented within a very short time frame. And of course, doing this with high fund and short period, especially when it comes to the regulations, if you are working in a financial or banking industry, it means that the need of the board committee involvement and influence on the information security, both ways, communication, it increased and become more well appreciated. So yes, today most of organization board committees are discussing on the board table issues, not only about information incident as much as about the future and enabling the business operation for going forward. Yep.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And for our next question, Erdal, I am going to buy you lunch the next time I'm in the Emirates if you can keep this to under 1 minute because it's a big topic. So the question for you is, what are the key challenges you see now and in the next 6 months?
I think Brian mentioned this already. Now, the biggest key challenges is, besides going to work, being healthy, is of course ensuring that we keep the momentum. Because as in every human learning, there is a pattern, right? People get focused. Oh my God, like remember Corona? When Corona was first out, people were scared, but then they started to loosen. As a result, the second wave is started to come. Same thing applies to security. Honestly, I don't see much difference between physical or health security and cyber security. Of course, both of them can be deadly. So we need to keep the momentum. We have to ensure that, again, as Brian said at the very beginning, training, non-stop training. I mean, look, I write all these books, I speak in most of conferences, but unfortunately, it's like a never-ending game. When it comes to cybersecurity, most of has Alzheimer's, And we have to keep reminding our end users and ourselves to ensure that we at least stay where we are and don't get worse. Because as we all know, there is no full security. There is no 100% security. We need to be secure as necessary. I think it's under 1 minute.
No, you're a little bit over. Sorry, but yeah, we can go
I
up
missed
anyway
the
next
lunch.
time over. Sorry about that. So thanks very much for that. Moving on to our poll number 2. The question, and due to time constraints, we're going to have the questions limited to 30 seconds, please. Have you conducted compliance audits or assessments during the pandemic? So please take a moment to answer this. So remember, this is not only COVID related, but also ongoing audit related activity. Is your regulator, assuming you're a regulated organization, still imposing strict audit requirements that are causing you to engage in audit activity? And if there has been any COVID related activity, are you doing this at the direction of, for example, a central bank or a national cybersecurity agency or center in order to ensure business continuity? Are you part of a critical national infrastructure industry vertical, etc.? So we're seeing the results shortly. All right, so seems to be in line with working from home. I assume that the almost half of respondents who answered not yet are at least to some degree due to being in industry that are not falling under compliance and audit requirements, or maybe timing. Remember, take all statistics with a grain of salt. But this should give us an idea that there is a significant amount of activity going on regarding remote audits, which is encouraging, especially under COVID-related working from home requirements. All right, so moving on to our next question. This is for all the panelists. Can you please give your views on the most effective security technologies that you're looking at or have already used? I love how specific these questions are. Let's start with Joanna again.
Sure. So without naming any technology or having it specific for my organization, I would just like to say maybe perhaps some of the important technologies to look out for, from my point of view, would be probably endpoint detection and response, to allow us to basically detect the potential breaches and react quickly. Then user and entity behavioral analytics that can provide us centric analysis alongside the information about networks, endpoints, and applications. Then I would also say an interesting one, given that we have a lot of spear phishing attacks, remote browsing can also be of a high value by addressing the malicious malware delivered via email and URLs or websites that we are facing now again. And one more that I would say would be perhaps deception tools, so that we create fake vulnerabilities, system shares and cookies to tempt basically the hackers into this environment.
Thank you. Moving on to Majed.
Instead of mentioning a specific technology, as an information security and business, and we need to have this kind of business mindset in organization that we are working for, is to think more about the emerging technologies era where we need to be involved as an information security. So, of course, I do believe most of the corporates, they have endpoint protection, they have self-farm protection, and it's applied for all other layers. However, we need to think about the emerging technologies and how we can capitalize on this new era in organizations.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Erdal.
Oops, sorry, I was already. Tools are our best friends, right? We need the tools to tell us what is our current status, what is missing, and how can we be better. But can we just rely on tools? Definitely not. But something which can tell me my assets is the right team, which can help me to do the gap assessment, to get tools with the right resources. This includes talents. It will be my ultimate wish list for 2021, because the hackers, they keep evolving. Unfortunately, we, the defenders, we are not as fast as them, but using the right tools can help us. And events like this, learning, educating ourselves, can help us to catch them up and hopefully stop them as well, where possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next question, we'll rotate the order this time. There's a lot of skill sets in cybersecurity, and I see a lot of discussion around skill set and learning as well. So this is a very timely question. There's a lot of skill sets. Which skills do you think will become more important for your organization the next year or the near future? Maybe starting with Erdal for this one.
Okay. Honestly, I have a book called Cybersecurity for Beginners, and there, cybersecurity is an end-to-end process, which you can be a programmer, or you can be like Kevin Mitnick, for example. He's known for being the most famous hacker, but in reality, he is one of the best, or one of the first software engineers. I don't want to getting what you want out as well. So skill set is important. Usually certification is the best way to show what you know, and CISP maybe could be a good one because it covers all the basics. Or if you look at EC Council or at SENS, they have really some great certifications. Logical operations, they have some great courses, not because I authored them, but because they are touching the real life. But the best training, I would highly recommend everybody. Make sure, again, Brian in the beginning said that, right? Like, listen to the hackers. Build your own VM, study whatever you like, get any book you like, and practice. Try, always think, like, yourself in a street that someone can attack you any second, and you have some money, you will protect yourself, right? Think your computer in this way and try to protect it.
Thanks, Erdal. You've got a little bit of bandwidth issue and lag there, so your sound's cutting out a little bit. Maybe you want to have a quick look at it. It's on and off. Moving on to Majed, regarding the most important skills in your organization going forward that you see.
I'm sure we already have, as far as we are cybersecurity experts, even with the new juniors in this domain, they are quite equipped well with the infrastructure skills that to protect their networks, like firewall, IPS, antiviruses, and the list never ends. However, I want to stress on with the COVID-19 again, where this is make or change the game big time for us as an information security. Maybe we need to spend more time to acquire application security skills in whatever application, whether in-house or an external ready-made application. In addition to this, as a technical team, maybe, and this is something I saw during my 20 years career, maybe we need to spend some time in understanding the business or having the business mindset to connect the dots between the cybersecurity and the real business operation, where we can convince and where we can show the great value out of the cybersecurity. It's not about only getting aligned with the X regulation or standard, as much as how this will be really benefiting the business itself. Yes.
Thank you very much. Jelena, 1 minute, please.
Sure. I think I'm doing quite well on my answers. I'm keeping it very
outstanding.
But I definitely think that CISOs will need to keep a finger on the pulse of technological changes and risks and opportunities that are coming our way. And just to name a few obvious ones that all the CISOs already should have or would need to have is malware analysis and reversing, thinking like a black hat person, excellent communication skills, cloud security skills, much required these days. And interesting to note is also that as the artificial intelligence and machine learning are becoming more infused into the business, we might find ourselves assisting, in fact, privacy and legal functions such as a DPO, for example, on the ethics of trusting the artificial intelligence decision making.
Excellent. Way under. Thank you very much for that one. So moving on to our next poll. Question is, and obviously this is going to be interesting in light of potentially changing cybersecurity budget. 30% at 30 seconds. Did your cybersecurity team change in size during this time? Now, all organizations in the world, especially the regulated ones, those that are part of critical national infrastructure or those who've been seriously attacked in the past, are much more likely to have seen an ongoing evolution of cybersecurity budgets over the past years and decades, even, you know, from being laughed at a little bit as something that the geeks are doing to becoming a core vital part of your organization. So obviously we've got a few economic concerns coming out of COVID, and we'd like to see how and whether this has impacted your organization size. Results are coming up. All right, so no change really, and that's actually interesting. And again, I think we need to take into account a lot of organizations have some economic nervousness, but as they say, life goes on even for the bad guys. So you know, there has been obviously a couple of organizations, nearly a third, who've upped their resources, while the majority have not seen a change. Moving on to our next question for all of our panelists. We had a question from somebody that people would like to know, what strategies are you taking, assuming this has affected you, to defend against advanced persistent threats or APTs? So maybe starting with Majed for this one.
Okay. There are a lot of aspects that we can go with. However, I will try to make it in 1 minute. I think the user behavior analytics, we need to focus more on the social engineering and also educate, because the people internal people is the most weakness cycle. And the second one is to spend more time on the security operations center and network monitoring, where we can have a full view of the internal DMZ networks. And that's it for now. Okay.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Jelena, please.
Sure, I will again keep it very short, but just to also say that the scary part to keep in mind for APTs is that people think, oh no, this targets only government organizations. In fact, it unfortunately targets any sensitive data. So some of the things that I would say perhaps to look for are application whitelisting and governance around preventing malicious software and unapproved programs into your environment. Patch applications such as the web browser, PDF viewers, Flash, restricting the administrative privileges to those who need access based on the user duties, basically, and patching the operating systems on a regular basis as well as the ad hoc basis.
Thanks very much. And Erdal?
So what is a cybersecurity strategy? It is a plan for managing organizational security risk according to define the risk tolerance for the organization to meet the business organizational objectives and goals. In this matter, I would definitely look at the threats. I would definitely look at the current status and try to get the best way out. It's like a sports game. You are in a league and you have weekly games. As a coach, it's your job to measure up your team, train them up, analyze the opponent, watch what's happening, check the weather out, and prepare yourself and the team, of course, mentally and physically. The same applies also to cybersecurity. As long as we know what the risks are and how we can defeat them, this will be the best strategy, in my opinion.
Thanks very much. We've got 2 minutes left, so let's take one question from the audience. I like this one here. Somebody's asking about how important is monitoring dark web for securing your organization. So keeping an eye on the bad guys. Maybe I'll pick one of you guys. Whoever speaks first gets to answer that one.
All right.
Go for it.
Let me talk about dark web. As you can see, I got also a book there as well. Dark web is the best place for you to get information. As we all know, dark web, I mean, many people always talk about the bad sides, but I used to be working as CISO for Secunia, and we had more than 300 people dedicated in dark web to collect information and share this information with our clients. Dark web could be a great resource for you to see what is upcoming. Yelena, Majid, anything what you want to share?
Definitely, thank you, Erdal. I'm with you on this. I agree with this. Perhaps if you're allowed to use it, it's a good thing. We don't use it. We don't use the information from the dark web from other reasons because we're just in the situation. But it is, I agree with you, Erdal, on this. It's a great source of information that you can use from there. Knowing where to stop.
Nothing to add.
Someone said a great comment, sorry to cut you off, in our WhatsApp group for the JSEC. It said, dark web is just someone else's computer. I like it. I had to read it. I don't know who it was, but sorry to cut you off, Majid. It is now WhatsApp group. Oh, okay, sorry.
Majid, anything you'd like to add before
Please,
we wrap
Majid?
up?
Of course, nothing to add. Just agree.
Okay, so I'd like to sincerely thank all of our panelists, and thanks for the audience for answering the polls and for your questions. We'll be trying to answer some questions in the Q&A function in Zoom as we go on. And with that, I would like to hand back over to James.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much to all our panelists. John, thank you very much. Great job moderating there. It gives me a great pleasure now to move our conference agenda along today. Next up, we're going to be hearing about some of the biggest changes that have taken place within the cyber criminal ecosystem. And to shed light on that topic is an expert from FireEye. He's the head of Mandiant Threat Intelligence for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. Please welcome Jens Monrad. Welcome, Jens.
Thank you, James.
Joining us from Denmark today, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. And I'm just going to share my screen. And while I do that, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's been really interesting to follow the conversation. And obviously, given the current circumstances, I hope everybody is safe and sound and doing well. I am going to talk about some of the things that have changed in the cyber criminal ecosystem, because I think a lot of the things that I've already heard so far from the panel and obviously from the keynote speaker, resonates really well with what I'm going to talk about. As I only have 20 minutes and I'll try to keep it to 15 minutes so we have time to answer some questions, I'm going to move a bit quickly over some of the topics. But I think one thing that I want to start with is really that when we look into the cyber criminal ecosystem, it is really a direct consequence of the way that we are digitalizing everything, the way that organizations are building new capabilities in cyberspace, the way that governments wants to communicate to its citizens, issue digital identification cards and all of that. And I don't say that because I don't believe in digitalization and the evolution of business and all of that, but I think it's really important for us to understand that it is a direct consequence. The cyber criminal ecosystem consists of many different components, but it is in reality, and I'm sure most of you will agree with me on this, is that in reality, it is a much more agile ecosystem than any business can produce. And that is obviously because there's no rules, there's no compliancy, there's no Q&A and so on. If things doesn't work, meaning that if you cannot monetize your victims, then you will change to a new procedure. So some of the most emerging threats that we are currently seeing and what we are monitoring and what we expect will play out in the rest of 2020 and moving forward is definitely ransomware. And ransomware is a really interesting story because it is one of the most quickly developed methodologies in making money within the cyber criminal ecosystem. I'll share a few slides on that. But we shouldn't neglect things that have always been part of the ecosystem, things like malware or spam that really relies on having a big volume so you can hit a lot of targets. And obviously we have seen that on the back of COVID-19 or some of the Black Lives Matters movements across the world, and obviously in the US, and elections and so on, because topics that have a global attention will be used as alerts in phishing emails and so on. And then obviously the last part, which I think is really interesting here, is that we also now see cyber criminals, and they have been doing this for some time, using different types of injection methods into legitimate websites, typically e-commerce websites or websites that where you can enter your credit card details and so on. And this is important because cyber criminals can also see that the current value of credit cards is diminishing. So the value of obtaining a stolen credit card is a lot less today than it was maybe 5 years ago. So that means that they need to move very quickly in order to monetize the specific credit card details. But what you can really see here, which I think is really interesting, is that when we look at it from a financially motivated perspective, cyber criminals were focusing a lot on point of sales, and point of sale is really either terminals where you swipe your credit card, or it can be electronic terminals where you can type in details and so on. But obviously, as we see e-commerce industries and obviously the financial industry are becoming much better at securing and monitoring fraud, detecting a stolen credit card being used, the time it takes to actually detect that is a lot less than it was a few years ago. Cyber criminals need to figure out a new way of making money, and this is sort of the graph here is illustrating that. We can certainly see that there is an interest also from the cyber criminal groups that were focusing on stolen credit card details. They are now turning their focus to ransomware, because that means that they might have a higher guarantee of getting paid. And that leaves me actually to this really interesting thing that we've seen as part of the evolution of ransomware. Ransomware used to be a game where you were really focusing on volume, meaning you didn't necessarily understand who you were targeting. It was much more important to distribute your ransomware malware to as many victims as possible. That could be organizations, it could be private users, and so on. And from a defending perspective, one of the best advices that we as an industry could actually provide to victims was, first, don't pay, and secondly, ensure that you have a backup. Because if you have a backup, then yes, it will be expensive to restore your environment, but you don't necessarily have to pay if you have the data at hand in some offsite environment. So what we saw ransomware operators do was that they would actually change to a post-intrusion distribution of ransomware, meaning that they would fully compromise organizations, ensure that they had a full understanding of the network, ensure that they have full visibility, enough privileges inside the network, and then they would deploy the ransomware to ensure that there was a higher chance of the victim organizations paying out. That also meant that now it is not really a game where they're focusing on volume. Now they are selecting targets based on either maturity or based on any other situation where they have a higher guarantee of getting paid. And the real dangerous scenario here is also that now ransomware operators will also leak the data. So they have a secondary method of extorting the victim organizations, where they will say, well, if you don't pay the ransom, getting access to your infrastructure, we will actually leak the data to the public. And we all know that when we read about breaches and when we read about different companies that are losing potential sensitive data, we are already judging their maturity. And in our mind as a public, we might perceive them as immature, or we might, raise the question, why didn't they protect our data better, and so on. And from a ransomware perspective, we don't necessarily understand whether or not the data that they're leaking is legitimate, or potentially if it's a manipulated type of data that they're now leaking to the public. So this is a real scenario that everybody is facing. And this is also why I'm talking so much about this one in particular, and cybercrime in particular, is that this is a real global challenge. It is something that everybody is facing. They have a cybercrime challenge in China. in the Middle East, in Russia, in the United States, in Europe, and so on. So cybercrime is really a global challenge, and it obviously very significantly different from state-sponsored campaigns. The other thing, and the reason why I'm showing you this slide, is really that when we look at within the financial sector, and this is from June 2020, what we are detecting within our customer environment, this is our telemetry data. So obviously this is also very FI biased, meaning that we are only, what you're seeing here is really a result of what our technology is able to detect. So obviously that could change from different technology and so on. But the key thing I want to emphasize here is really not the malware names, but really the functions. So what you can really see here, that maybe the top malware here is really focusing on stealing credentials, and this is still the #1 challenge in most industries. And what we see really from a malware detection standpoint is that the malware is designed to steal legitimate user credentials, because then you can use those credentials. You can either sell them or you can misuse them directly in some sort of unauthorized access form. But the potential here is also much greater, because a state-sponsored campaign, for example, that want to remain less noisy in the environment, they could also go and purchase these stolen legitimate credentials and use them in their campaigns and in their targeted environments. So this is something that we are obviously focusing a lot on. And some of you might have seen the news on the UK and US government were indicting a person from Kazakhstan. And this person is really interesting, because him, or at least him and a few associates, they have made a fortune of selling unauthorized access by stealing credentials and selling them on the dark web, on closed forums and so on. So this is just one part of the ecosystem that I think is really important. But it also emphasized that the #1, I think, threat really is the stolen credentials. So how do we ensure that our employees don't get their credentials stolen? And it also raises the question, I think, that is really interesting to reflect a bit on, is how do we ensure that we minimize the privileges for the users inside our organization? Not everybody needs global or local administrative privileges. Some can actually just get less or more restrictive privileges and still use and remain functional within their job role. The other thing I want to show as well within the financial sector is really, I was kind of surprised when I did this collection. So what I'm really showing you here is what are some of the top vulnerabilities that cyber criminals are using as part of their mission in compromising organizations within the financial sector. And what you can really see here is that we are still in 2020 seeing that cyber criminals are successfully using a vulnerability that was actually reported in 2017. So that means that there is still a challenge in either visibility or having a structure when it comes to patching or identifying vulnerable services, servers, and products inside the environment. And obviously, from a cyber criminal perspective, if things are working, if you're successful in making money, then you don't actually need to change your game. You don't need to change your methods. And obviously, if you can use a vulnerability from 2017 in order to be successful in deploying malware or stealing sensitive information that you can monetize, then there's no reason to change it. So we really also need to make it more expensive for the cyber criminals. So we are basically forcing them to keep innovating as well as we are innovating our defensive mechanisms. So this leads me to some of the things that I also want to, ask the audience about and reflect a bit on. And this is also, I've been a principal analyst for a long time. And obviously, from an analyst perspective, one of the good things here is really that I can just tell you how bad things are, but I don't necessarily need to offer any sort of good advice or where do you start and how should you change behavior. So obviously, I want to also change that a bit and reflect on some of my thoughts. And the number one question I actually ask to organizations when I meet with CISOs or if I speak at a board meeting is, how are you doing against your adversaries? The reason why I'm asking that is that when we look at the cyber threat landscape today and the number of security events, alerts, vulnerabilities, and all of that we need to do better at on a daily basis, we cannot do better at 100% on every challenge. So we need to be better at identifying the adversaries or maybe the malware that will affect our organization the most. And this is very, very key. There will be, cynically said, some things that are okay, that you don't necessarily need to deal with straight away, whereas other things that could be threat actors or specific information stealing malware or ransomware, for example, that you need to immediately deal with, or specific vulnerabilities. But you need to have a better understanding of the adversaries that poses the biggest risk to your organization. And some of the things that we basically see is really, what are some of the factors that are influencing the threat landscape? Meaning, how can you better understand the threat actors? And I'm not going to talk too much about cyber espionage here, because cyber espionage is also some of the things that are really, it's an outside risk. We as organizations, we cannot necessarily determine if we are becoming a target of a state-sponsored campaign, because that could be for outside things like geopolitical consequences, global conflicts, and other elements that we don't necessarily are in control of. From a cyber criminal and hacktivism perspective, these are some of the elements that we can actually better control and better defend against, and better have a understanding of what we are actually seeing. So obviously, understanding the threat landscape will be really key here. The other question I want to ask, and I want you to reflect on, is what is the optimal way to deny or detect the adversaries that you have now been identifying and are now keeping a track on? And I'm using what we call the Mandiant attack lifecycle here. And it's really not about any sort of product or technology. But when I look at cyber attacks today, regardless of the motivation, so that could be state-sponsored, or it could be cyber criminal, or it could be opportunistic attacks, they always start the same way. We don't necessarily understand how they're doing reconnaissance. My theory is really the digital footprint that we are leaving as individuals and organizations is probably playing a vital part of it. What I mean by that is if I'm a cyber criminal and I sit on a certain vulnerability in let's say a database program, I could go on LinkedIn and search for all the database administrators for that given application and then try and send them a phishing email. But the initial compromise usually always happens the same time. It's a social engineering component, either by email or by phone or by SMS that we've already heard about. And then it is a matter of establishing a foothold inside the victim organization. That could be by malware, or it could be by any other tool. And it's really key here to actually figure out what mechanisms and what products and what technology and processes do you have in place in each of these steps. Because what we are currently seeing happening in the cyber criminal ecosystem, and certainly also in the state-sponsored espionage campaigns, is that the operators, they are leaning towards using public available tools. So, for example, using either commercial available red teaming tools, or some of the offensive tools that are being publicly released, because it makes sense to use them because it's less expensive than developing your own tools. And from a network defending perspective, it gets harder and harder to differentiate a legitimate user from an internal penetration testing tool, for example. So this is really important. So you can really look at these steps also in a different way when we look at it from a risk and cost perspective. The sooner you're able to identify something, the less expensive it's going to be for you, not just in money, but also in resources, and obviously also the business impact as well. And obviously, the further we move to the right, the more expensive it's going to be for an organization, because it's going to be expensive in, let's say, external consultants, for example, but it's also going to be expensive potentially with regulatory fines and what we also see, and obviously brand damage, and that will have a high business impact as well. So one thing that I always recommend is really identify what processes and what tools that you have in each of these steps, in the initial compromise, establishing foothold, escalating privileges, and all of those, and then figure out how can you actually push things further to the left so it becomes less expensive for you. It is really an operation that consists of having technology, security controls in place, having the right processes in place. Who do you need to inform inside your organization? How do you inform the different elements inside your organization? What should your user do inside an organization when they accidentally click on a link? We have already heard different takes on how users are actually starting a breach by clicking on things or accepting things or accidentally wiring money to cyber criminals. So what should users actually do when they click on something? Do they know who to phone? And the people that they phone, do they actually know what to do and what to prioritize and so on? So pushing things further to the left is really vital in order to do that. And you can only do that if you have started by identifying the adversaries that matters the most to your organization. So this really comes down to what I always talk about, building a cyber threat profile. And a cyber threat profile is really a way of you to measure threat actors across different motivation sets. What are some of the risks that you're facing? And this example here is just a very simplified model where I'm taking the insurance sector, and then I look into, well, governments, cyber criminals, and hacktivism, and then the different elements that might pose a risk to my business as a insurance company, for example. So, for example, intelligence on high value targets. Well, we see threat actors from governments, from cyber criminal, from hacktivism. Obviously, they're very keen on stealing those elements. Whereas, for example, our risk models and processes, well, cyber criminals, they don't necessarily care too much about that because it's really hard to monetize quickly. Whereas, for example, financial espionage or large quantities of consumer personal identifiable information, for example, or insurance fraud, well, these are elements that cyber criminals can quickly turn into some sort of monetization scheme for, and then enriching themselves, for example. So these elements, I think, is part of building that threat profile that I highly suggest organizations to do. But the cyber threat profile is really two things here, really. It's obviously understanding the external threat landscape. You need to understand things like what are affecting your industry, what are affecting your organization based on where you're placed, based on the political landscape and so on. But you also need to combine it with the internal risk elements that you have inside your organization. How does your infrastructure look like? Are you operating primarily in the cloud, for example? How can you allow your network defenders to have access to forensic data in the cloud? Or do you have customer data that you need to protect in order to be compliant with different regulatories, for example, GDPR in the EU? Do you rely on a service provider that are monitoring your system or having some sort of access to your system? All of those elements that are, should I say, basic risk assessment elements, when you combine that with the external threat landscape, you can then build a dynamic threat profile that allow you to stay on top of some of the things in the threat environment. And obviously, this is my very, should I say, biased part, because I as the head of Mandiant Threat Intelligence, I'm a firm believer in having context will definitely help any organization in order to better protect themselves. And it doesn't have to be Mandiant Threat Intelligence, but having context that allows you to learn about the adversaries, learn about how they're operating in cyberspace, when they're changing their tools or the techniques and procedures, that will help you. But one key thing here is really, and this is something that I say to many organizations that I talk to, when they talk to me about they want to invest in some sort of cyber threat intelligence capability, they always start in the implementing practice. How can I integrate a threat feed into my systems, into my SIM, and all of that, where the reality is really that they need to establish the foundations. They need to have a understanding of the threats that they should be most concerned about. They need also to understand what will they use intelligence to, how can they use the context that they now have to better defend against threats, but also inform the CISO, for example. The CISO don't necessarily care about malware detections. They care more about how they're minimizing the risk, and then the information that the CISO needs to pass on to the CFO or to the CEO, for example, that doesn't need to contain any sort of malware analysis. It's more about how are we minimizing the risk for our organization. And then one very important thing is really intelligence requirements. What are you trying to do with the threat feed or the information that you are now investing in, or even producing internally? So this is just a very sound advice that this needs to be put in place first, rather than something to think about when you are implementing it. And then obviously, as you mature on that journey, you can then realize different capabilities. You can now use intelligence and the context that you either produce or that you purchase externally to also figure out, well, where are my gaps? What do I need to be better at detecting? Do I need to invest in more technology? Do I need to change processes and so on? So with that, that was a very brief introduction to everything. And I want to say thank you for, obviously, for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Jens. We've got time for one very quick question and answer. You talked there about how it's imperative for organizations to know their enemy, to sort of figure out where potential adversaries are in relation to their own posture. Just how far ahead are cyber criminals in this fight? How big an advantage do they have?
So the cyber criminals, they are further ahead than any organization. That is obviously because they don't have to really follow any sort of guidelines. They will use what works, and when things doesn't work, then they'll change mechanism into something. But what I would say though is that one thing that keeps working for them is sending an email and then trying to get an employee to click on a link. That is still, I think, when we do incident response, maybe between 80 and 95%, that is how all compromises start.
Thanks very much, Jens. And thank you very much for sharing your insight there on a range of fascinating topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It now gives me great pleasure to welcome back our moderator for today's next panel, which will discuss recent breaches in the financial sector. Welcome back, Jelena Matone, Senior Head of CISO and Operational Risk of the European Investment Bank. Welcome back, Jelena.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll hand over.
So what I will do right now is also, it will be my great pleasure to introduce our next panelists. So welcome Brian Seeley. Brian is a world-renowned cybersecurity expert, ethical hacker, author, and former US Marine, possibly the only celebrated ethical hacker who wiretapped the Secret Services and the FBI. Welcome. So then we have John Salmon. He's the Regional Director of Continental Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Welcome, John. Then we have Amna Al-Madhoub, Senior Information Security Analyst at the Bank of ABC Bahrain. She's an information security professional with 13+ years of experience in multiple domains with information security. She spent the past 6 years focusing on security operations centers and incident response activities. Welcome, Amna. Then we have Nathan Swain. He's a veteran cyber resilience specialist and ethical hacker. He's a global senior leader in cybersecurity within financial services government, including IT risk, cyber resilience, threat intelligence, and security defense design and testing. Welcome. Then we've got Victor Polic. He's a chief of information security and assurance services at the International Labour Organization, a specialized agency of the United Nations. His 25 years career in the IT industry spans across multilateral financial, humanitarian, standardization, and development public sector organizations. Welcome, Victor. And then we have, last but not least, Mohammed Issa Hamad. He's the head of information security at Bahrain Islamic Bank, and he's an experienced information security professional and technology enthusiast. His specialties include information security management, business continuity, secure development, and operations management. So welcome all of our panelists. Thank you all for being here. And now I would like to ask John perhaps to share some of the latest intel on recent breaches with us.
Thanks, Ilona. So what I'm about to tell you is from the lens of FSI SAC. That means that what I can share with you is what has been reported to us, trends that we've seen based on what our members, as well as external partners from both the private and public sector have informed us about around the world. We're a global organization protecting the financial sector, so we have some visibility on the major trends affecting the industry. So generally what we've noted is that many of the fears that we had around what would happen when the COVID pandemic started escalating did not really come to pass per se. There was a lot of worries about high sophistication, new techniques, new actors that would take advantage of the pandemic, both customers and citizens' fears, but also changing realities in organization cybersecurity posture. Hasn't really happened. This happens every time there is a major disaster of some kind. What we have seen, though, is that the same old stuff has basically been adapted. People have done a find and replace with whatever disaster, whatever public crisis, and put COVID in the ransomware mails. There has been a marked increase in phishing across the sector, both against customers and employees or management. What we did see initially is a spike in COVID-themed domains. That seems to have decreased fairly rapidly as both law enforcement and companies and vendors became more accustomed to this and were able to defend as well as educate their users against it. And what we generally have been seeing across the entire last few months has been a significant rise, depending on the country, depending on the subsector, in low sophistication attacks. That's network reconnaissance, the denial of service, etc. Most important thing is to emphasize that, as I said earlier, business goes on for the bad guys as well. The same old attacks keep on going. Some of these are kids home from school. Some of these are just cyber criminals taking advantage of changing circumstances and attention spans. And they do keep on hitting us with the same old stuff that we've been seeing for ages. So keep that in mind. The last thing before I drop off is that one of the major challenges we've seen is basically the attention span of senior management has shifted, and organizations have had to come to terms with the realities of working from home, which in turn has brought entirely different threats, not necessarily from cyber threats, risks from cyber threats, but mainly from things like reshifting of resources, reshifting of capabilities to new operational realities. Back over to you, Yelena.
Thank you, John. This is greatly appreciated and very insightful. Now I'd like to go on to Amna and ask you perhaps one question from your experience, and to see if you have any horror stories that you would like to share with us from Bahrain. What threats are you seeing?
Thanks, Yelena. And aligned with what John just mentioned, we've seen an increase in the phishing emails that's being delivered. And it's also targeting a lot of our customers in Bahrain. We've seen a lot of SMS phishing, not only those that come through email, but SMS and WhatsApp messages as well. Customers are lured into websites where they are requested to provide information not only about their bank accounts, but also private information like full name, CPR numbers, or passport numbers, and that sort. And it's been recently increasing. A lot of customers and clients were receiving it across Bahrain. And that's one of the key areas that we've seen recently. Over to you, Yelena.
Thank you, Amna. Very good. Moving on to Mohammed. I would like to ask you, Mohammed, if you could also please share some of the views and comments since you're based out of Bahrain as well. And are you seeing something similar, or what are you doing about it?
We're seeing the same pattern, and the same attacks are affecting both of us. It's affecting a lot of customers in Bahrain. So people receive an SMS asking them to update their information, and they click, and the attackers get their information. So what we're doing is that we worked with a lot of people. We worked with the TRA, Telecommunication Regulatory Authority, that we immediately notify them and block people from accessing that website. Another thing we did is that we know that these attackers are using the same emails So we have indicators of compromise. Whenever someone registers with that email, we block them at the gateway level, and we have our contact center staff completely eliminating that account and card and everything. So nowadays, we are able to detect an attack before the customer knows about it. Another thing, we did a lot of detective work, a lot of preventive things. The most important thing that we started experimenting on is to have some offensive countermeasures. So whenever I see a link like this, I flood it with 6,000 credit card numbers that are fake. And I'm just making them spend all their time trying these fake cards. We tried taking the site down by actually just trying to attack it and doing a lot of SQL injection on their website. I mean, since they're nasty, we can be nastier than them. So we did a lot of detective measures, preventive and corrective measures, and now we're doing offensive measures against them.
Thank you, Mohammed. This is very good. The beauty of having us all virtually here is that now we are moving the countries and going to Switzerland. Victor, I'd like to ask you if you can share with us some of the recent breach attempt stories, perhaps from your realm there.
Yes, okay, so Switzerland, just like every other country affected by COVID, as you know, and when we speak about phishing attacks and supply chain attacks, that's probably what I thought might be the most interesting for this audience here, because we do all definitely depend on our supply chains. So, and not every link in the supply chain has the same level of resources and skills to actually defend against even the most basic attacks. So what I would highlight as a horror story is phishing attacks that are what we have observed in stages. So basically attacking those more weakest links in our supply chain, like smaller subsidiaries of travel agencies, then actually attacking larger organizations at their subsidiaries. So for traditional travel fraud, for example, where it is very difficult during the pandemics to verify who are you communicating with, obviously. So it's not only the analogy of knowing your customer, but knowing your partner, knowing your vendor. So those are some examples, but so the measures that we're putting in place are actually stepping up the awareness program, that it is more contextualized and more targeted to those that are at risk, at the higher risk, highlighting the case studies, highlighting the measures, but also putting some novelty measures in place to actually detect contextual based high risk fish and actually do the triage from those phishing attacks that are less critical and focus on those that are the most important ones.
Great, thank you, Victor, a lot for this. Now to Nathan. Nathan, I understand you're also an ethical hacker and having helped many clients in the financial services, and you have some very interesting stories to tell. So can you share with all of us some of your horrific ones?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining JISEC today, and thank you for having me on the panel. I have helped government sector and financial services sector clients in the past. And I can share some specific stories in great detail. Some of the ones I could cover are compromising systems that are actively seeing trillions of dollars every day passing through their networks. Other examples could touch upon other central bank-based systems, which are also settling hundreds of billions of pounds per day. But one specific example I'll share today was a top tier bank, which I was asked to test. And ultimately we sat with the bank and worked out a red team test, which is essentially a hacking scenario-based threat-led exercise where you map out what the threat actor will do, and you will enact that particular scenario to see if it's valuable or not within the context of the architecture of the platform used. So the bank's website was compromised using uploaded images in order to create an account, but the image file itself was actually a remote access Trojan, and the system was tricked into thinking that it was an image file when actually it wasn't. So, you know, to keep it brief, however, the system was compromised and then used as a pivot from the DMZ into their internal network. And rather than just stealing client data, I also managed to steal the HR data, including all of the staff's details, of course. And just as an Easter egg, I created a new employee on the HR systems as well.
Thank you so much, Nathan, for this. Thank you for sharing this story with us. Now I'd like to ask the question for all of the panelists here. And I'd like to see if you have experienced an increase in phishing. This has been more focused on internal staff or your customers. So perhaps, Brian, would you like to go first?
Yes, increased. Mostly in internal staff. The targeted spear phishing stuff is mostly for higher level executives, and then there's a lot of just sort of basic level attempts. But some of the more targeted stuff where the language even matches some of our people's emailing policies or the way that their signatures look, and then having websites custom tailored with logins that match our Office 365 stuff. So it's sophisticated enough because some of my clients have, one of the clients has 8 petabytes of data. So lots of stuff in clients like Facebook. So people get enemies. I mean, I've had drugs sent to my house from people who are trying to get me in trouble. So yeah, it's weird.
Victor?
Yes, I would like to highlight, for example, the combination of different channels that attackers are using. So obviously, like Amna mentioned, the SMSs, but also wishing. They're eroding trust of internal staff by calling them. So doing the wishing, basically voice calls combined. They combine with cyber spotting. They actually create domain names that look like our suppliers. They use steganography to hide links inside the images within the message, so that there are nothing that the user can recognize in the phish. But you have to use techniques to actually deserialize message, you know, in order to understand what's encoded inside, and this kind of things. So yeah, they're getting very sophisticated. Obviously, we are in the asymmetric war, cyber war.
Can I add to that quickly? Because I'm also from Switzerland, and we have our German dialect is very peculiar. And this has been something that's been happening over the past 10, 15 years, that attackers, especially fraudsters, are starting to more adapt their techniques to local languages, local dialects, you know, not just in English. You know, you could tell in the past if somebody was speaking broken, heavily accented English. When somebody in Switzerland, for example, addresses you in Swiss German, or in Luxembourg in Letzeburgisch, or you know, in some very specific national or regional Arabic dialect, I assume, a non-technical person is going to be much more likely to trust that person. And that's not technical, that's simply psychology. And we're going to keep seeing increases in this type of regionalized and targeted attack if it's an easier way to get money out of people who might be a bit more innocent and not educated.
Thank you, John. Amna, would you like to say something as well?
Yeah, I just want to add something to the conversation. Mohammed mentioned something interesting earlier, which is recognizing when a fraudster register these domains. It goes alongside for organization to also monitor their own online presence. And notice when a fraudster try to recreate their similar website to theirs, monitor their brand usage online, have them monitor if there are domains that are curated to similar to their own, to ensure that they are not targeted as well. So this is another area where organizations should look into having a brand protection service to alert them upfront with these activities.
And I'm sure, thank you, Amna. I'm sure, Nathan, you would like to add something?
Yeah, I think one of the common themes that we're all seeing is sophisticated attacking groups, criminal entities, you know, which some are obviously working with state-sponsored actors, we're seeing compromise in trust in social media platforms, obviously, Twitter being the main one, but we're seeing, blended attacks, more sophisticated attacks using multiple platforms. So very, very complicated social engineering attacks, and obviously very, very successful.
Thank you, Nathan.
Okay. I'll answer this question differently. The phishing that was increased internally is all simulated phishing that we sent to our employee. So we actively worked very hard during the COVID time to make sure that the level of awareness is high. Our phishing simulation is getting better and better every day. So recently we sent to all employees that from the World Health Organization that the solution for COVID is out. That was clicked only by 0.002% of the population. So we moved drastically down from around 80% click rate to now where we have one employee out of the entire thing. But even one employee is not enough for us. Speaking of monitoring brands, we use the same thing. And surprisingly, because our name is BISB, our brand monitoring always sends us everything that has the word cannabis in it. So we have the entire directory of every single cannabis store or online website that is registered every day. The rule now by the vendor is called BISB, not cannabis.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. And now we are proceeding to our first poll. Please, all of you, try to vote, and the more answers we have, the better it is. So the question basically is, has your organization taken any additional measures to enhance security tool detection, capability monitoring, and visibility? Please, everybody, this is anonymized. The more answers we have, the better it is for the polls. This will be very interesting to see what we get. And at this point, I think we have a little bit of time left still. We wish we could actually discuss a bit more on this and see what tools people have done. Okay, let's see the results. It's very good. We see that the majority of the people have taken additional measures to enhance the security tool detection, 64%, 23% no, and 13% don't know. Something along the lines that we would expect. Thank you. So now we have a question that I would like to pose again to all of our panelists. What have been your major observed threats, risks during the COVID? Example, some low sophistication attacks that we talked about, maybe some of the spear phishing attacks or network reconnaissance, anything that you could say. So maybe Mohammed, you can start.
Yeah, I think looking at the way attacks are happening, we had to design our services with security in mind from the beginning. So we're looking at security by design. The most damaging thing that is happening now because of COVID is that you have a lot of organizations, banks included, rushing new services that are insecure. So while we are telling customers, do not click on unknown links, you have banks sending SMSs with bit.ly links. While we are telling them, do not engage with people in other methods, they are establishing a new WhatsApp channel. Or you have people calling, or you have the sales staff calling people from WhatsApp. So we want to make sure that security by design is there. Our biggest failure rate is because
we seem to have lost Mohammed.
Yeah, we seem to have lost him. So Brian, perhaps would you like to pick up on the question as well?
Sure.
I lost electricity in the house somehow, so I'm back on LTE now. That's my backup plan.
Please, continue.
I don't know.
No problem. Thank you for.
I don't know where I was cut, but what I was saying is that we need to build secure services from the ground up and make sure that the entire community is doing that.
Thank you, Mohammed. Sorry, Brian, I called you out as well, so.
I'm okay. He said it pretty well. Yeah, like, there's a lot of stuff happening. As long as people can be accessing their computers, you're limited only by your creativity. So all the hackers are all confined to their houses and we're bored. So unless you have ethics, not everyone does. The only safe way to like be safe from hackers is unplug all your stuff or fire all your employees. But that's not going to happen. So patch your stuff. And you can hire us. We'll help protect you, but it's not foolproof. Sleep tight.
Thank you, Brian. John?
Sorry, I thought that was pretty funny. You know, adding on to what Brian said, that nothing's changed in that sense, you know, because all, you know, as I mentioned earlier, life goes on, especially, you know, even for the bad guys. And I think one of them, the most important lessons there also is that every CISO and every security operations person needs to keep that in the back of their head. You know, even though COVID has been sucking the air from the room, you know, we're still getting the same old threats. And I think one of the advantages the bad guys have is that they're usually working from home anyway, so they're able to exploit that fact. What that means for new methodologies, you know, whether, you know, it's an adaptation of working logistics with social distancing, whatever, more people working from home over the long term, that remains to be seen. I don't think we have really any conclusive evidence yet of how that will change in the coming months or years.
Great, John. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Nathan, anything to add?
Yeah, certainly. I would like to challenge Brian. I do think there is a happy medium between putting systems online and having perhaps effective countermeasures, whether it be really good machine learning, artificial intelligence across the network. But most importantly, Mohammed, to go to your point, is designing things that are secure and understanding the threats, the attack surfaces, the attack vectors, and making sure it's locked down properly. So really good risk management skills on a technical level, I think, can help organizations meet the threats head on.
Thank you, Nathan. Amna, would you like to add something or challenge someone?
No, I'm good. I just want to add to everyone. Brian mentioned a good point, which is batching. We've seen recently as well. I mean, it's not new and it's not COVID specific, but when there are critical vulnerabilities that are being announced, please go ahead and plan for your patching and remediation activities, because you will see an increase on the people trying to exploit it upon release. So, and the information is there. So it's really important to patch the system, especially those that are most likely going to be compromised.
Thank you. And we have also Victor. Victor, would you like to add something?
Yes, on the less sophisticated hacking, of course, it's very effective these days during COVID, because there are many of our staff members and users that they're using their own devices. And the bring your own device policy that is under normal circumstances is not very effective these days. We have stepped up, for example, operationalizing policy to restrict access to some critical applications from any device. So that's combined with VPNs and verification. So continuous monitoring of access, identity management, correlation of these two things together makes sense to step up your protection from, let's say, less secure networks. But also educating users to think about their home networks, not just about their laptops, but also their routers, the Internet of Things devices that they have at home. So we've been working on that as well to actually increase and virtualize your environment as much as you can, so that your patching is stayed and contained in the virtual environments, virtual remote desktops, so you don't rely on the hardware patching and the BIOS upgrades, which are difficult because infrastructure teams don't want to get distant PCs unavailable after rebooting, right? So, and then to have people to bring their things to the office for patching. So this is no these days, and there are a lot of things to be done. So definitely, Brian, you're not going to stay out of job.
Thank you, Victor. Brian, I guess you feel much better now.
No, I'm too
Nathan
funny to
as
be
well.
fired.
So
less time for fitness, you know, and up.
Can I answer Nathan's challenge?
please
Please.
go ahead. 1 minute.
AI or machine learning is 50 to 100 years away from being able to determine whether someone's intention is good or not. As long as I can mimic the traffic of a good user, you will never catch me. If the traffic outbound looks exactly like it should, it'll never trip unless they're reading your messages, which requires actually breaking all the encryption involved in between. It's not going to happen. So AI is incomplete as it currently stands, but it was a good idea.
And let me add one thing to that very quickly, because that there's a saying that if you're in a group of people running away from the bear, you don't have to be the fastest person in the group, just don't be the slowest. A lot of the attacks that we discuss, you know, using hypothetical space age new technologies, that's not going to happen. I encourage you to look up XKCD encryption. Basically, there's always going to be somebody who's easier to get. Yeah, Brian knows it. There's always going to be an easier target. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't maintain good OPSEC, who doesn't patch anything. You know, we've had major breaches in the past. You know, I'm not going to name any specific South Asian countries that have experienced major ones because of poor technique. You don't need to do, you know, anything that could fool AI. You just need to use basic social engineering techniques and just go after the weakest target.
Thank you all. Given the time constraints we have, we would like to go now to move on to the poll number 2 that we have, second poll for today. So the question here is, did your organization observe an increase in cyber reconnaissance exploitation during the COVID-19? Yes, no, don't know. This will be very interesting to see as well from all of our participants. So we have a very short period of time to answer this. So please, everybody, just start answering if not already. Okay. So maybe perhaps by this point we can close the poll and see the result. Wow, 41% said yes, 13% said no, and 13% said don't know. It would be very interesting if we had more time to discuss a little more about the 61% participants that have answered yes.
It's more interesting to find out the 19%. Like, wait, we were supposed to check? That's scarier.
Yeah, surprise, guys. Sorry, you may not be. Well, that's the wording of the question. You may not be seeing it, but it's still happening.
John, I think. John,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Yeah, I was just saying, for those 19%, I can assure you that while you may not be seeing it, it's still happening. So it may just have been the wording of the question.
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps. So with this second poll and all the answers that you have given, I would like to close our panel for today, and I would like to thank you all very much for such an interesting panel, interesting answers that you have provided to all the audience today. So thank you everybody very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much to all our panelists, and thank you very much, Yelena, for moderating that discussion. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, thank you very much for tuning in today. It's been a fantastic conference session, a first virtual conference session brought to you by JISEC and Dubai World Trade Center. Dubai World Trade Center looks forward to welcoming you all to JISEC from the 26th to 28th of October for the live face-to-face event and the region's largest cybersecurity exhibition and conference. Thank you very much and see you all soon.